freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free.
Welcome back, everyone, to Patriot Coalition Live. I'm Matthew Nugent.
And I'm Jason Mrochek.
Thanks for joining us today, everybody. Our goal is to create a timeless resource and teach about the U.S. Constitution and the proper role of governments, the importance of America's Judeo-Christian heritage, and how to defend against threats to our republic. We want to engage members of our armed forces, veterans, first responders, and the patriots who support them in their noble professions. Folks, we have a new email address, which is freedom@patriotcoalitionlive.com. That's freedom@patriotcoalitionlive.com. We would love to hear from you. Please send us a line. All right, y'all ready?
Yes.
Let's do this. Okay, title of today's episode is Introduction to the Constitution. And just like the title says, this is going to be an introduction. We're not going to go in great detail now, just kind of give you an overview, give you some context, and a few examples. Okay, a little context. Let's go back a little bit. 1776, the Declaration of Independence was the breakup song, the breakup letter with England, between the 13 American colonies, and England said, you have not lived up to the bargain, so we are out of here. Remember, it was not a Revolutionary War. It was a war of independence because England did not live up to its side of the bargain specifically.
Yeah, they took their protection away from us, right? So we were no longer held any allegiance to them.
There you go. So that was, 1776 when our Declaration of Independence was signed, a beautiful document. Then 1777, what we call attribution to Jason for this, U.S. Constitution 1.0. And we say that because it's the precursor to the U.S. Constitution that we go by today. That U.S. Constitution.
Do you think I could change that and just call it a beta version? It's kind of like test mode, right?
It was
maybe
beta version.
Beta or 1.0. Okay, we'll work on it.
Yeah. Either way, both are your ideas. I like them both. So as far as how to call it, but either would work because beta meant it failed. Sometimes it does, and it did. And that was in 1777, but it was ratified and in about 4 years later. So during the War of Independence, we didn't have a constitution of any sort, but it basically failed because it was more like a treaty involving 13 countries than a set of bylaws to create one nation. Okay. Yeah. So what happened is 1787. Okay. The U.S. Constitution was drafted, but it was later ratified by the minimum number of states, which was 75%, in 1788. Now, what's interesting, even though it was ratified in 1788, the actual day that it became effective, where the 39 signers, the signatories, put their John Hancock on it, so to speak, was September 17th, 1789. So it's interesting to know that it takes a progression. Mail was slow back then too, or we call snail mail. I don't know what you call it back then. Can you be slower than snail mail? I mean,
it was probably faster back then than it is today.
Not just the junk mail you get, but yeah. I mean,
what's interesting about that day too, September 17th is, some people maybe don't know this, is today that is still, it's a national holiday called Constitution Day.
How about that? And back in the day, I think that Lincoln said you need to read the Constitution. Take time to read the Constitution. And it was actually taught in school. And it wasn't taught as a tool for Marxist ideology, but it was used to show that, and this is important, a little bit of context, is that at the time, it was the monarch and the tyrant had all the power. So we were breaking away from that, and it was what made America special. And it unleashed the creative potential of every single individual that desired to do so. Okay, so and note the Constitution did not originally have the first 10 amendments. Okay, it was introduced the year that the U.S. Constitution became effective, not ratified, became effective in 1789. But the first 10 amendments were not actually introduced, or rather ratified, become part of the U.S. Constitution at the time the Constitution came out.
Yeah, no, that's right. So at the time, you had the sort of the states' rights advocates in the Constitutional Convention that when everything was said and done and drafted, they still weren't really happy because it didn't quite go far enough to protect the individual liberties and the states' rights to be sovereign states. And this movement was led in large part by Thomas Jefferson, again, a brilliant member of the founding fathers. And so, but back then, being the statesmen that they were, they didn't hold the process hostage. They didn't say, no, we're not going to do this if we don't get our way. What they said was, okay, they obviously trusted each other. These men had been together for, about 4 months in the heat of the summer in Philadelphia. And they said, look, we can move this process forward, but we want your assurances. This is the states' rights advocates, the personal liberty advocates. We want your assurance, convention, that once we've ratified this, we will immediately go to work in adding amendments that will strengthen protections of individual liberty and the states' rights. So, and that's exactly what they did. So what's interesting was, even though Thomas Jefferson was, on one side of this disagreement, Madison was on the other side. So he was not in favor initially of all of these additions to the Constitution. But even so Jefferson won out, and ironically, Madison was the one that ended up drafting that Bill of Rights. There was 12 originally that he drafted in 1789, and then by 1791, only 10 of them were ratified by the states. And so that's actually how we got our Bill of Rights.
Okay, so 1789, September 17th, which is Constitution Day, 1789, and it took another 2 years before the Bill of Rights became part of the U.S. Constitution, another 2 years. So kind of an overview of the Constitution. What is the Constitution? It's our bylaws, how we play the game of government in the United States. If this were, there's no perfect analogy for anything necessarily, but if this were a game of football, this would tell you how the field is set up, how many players are going to be on the field on both sides, what the rules are going to be. If there is a disputed call on the field, how to adjudicate that. Yeah. And that's also, as the game of football progresses, or it has progressed over the years, there are rule changes. Those are called amendments or changes. So they're bylaws, rules, how to operate our government, and they tell us about processes on how to make changes. Now, there are actually 3 parts to the Constitution. The first one is the preamble, and the second is basically the bylaws, which there are 7 articles, okay, and the last is the 27 amendments, okay. So, if I may, Jason, I'd like to read the preamble to the United States Constitution.
Do it.
I love reading this stuff, guys. It just gets me so patriotically enthusiastic. So here we go. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America.
Yeah, so this is essentially, they are telling us why they are going to the trouble of setting up this Constitution, of constituting America. And they're telling us what their aims are, right? Even in there, to secure the blessings of liberty. This document is intended, and all those other things are a byproduct of protecting the blessings of liberty, securing the blessings of liberty.
Yeah, and if I could add something to that,
sure.
One of the couple words, it says a more perfect union. As Jason and I have talked about over the last several episodes of this podcast, the United States was one of the first nations in history to break out of the authoritarian or tyrannical rule, which means that thought process was still there within the people. So we had to break out of that. So people say, you'll hear this in critical race theory, which is racist, by the way. It says that the United States was evil. Listen, all of us are sinners. None of us is perfect. Okay. But you got to understand the context of things. We in a big ocean of tyranny, we were the nation that broke out of it, and we were in it. What you saw, what you have experienced, maybe almost 250 years. Obviously, we weren't there at the beginning, but this is what it looks like when people break out of that. Some people will still have old ideologies. So when it says a more perfect union, this is the penultimate example of what it looks like, and we must continue to fight.
Yeah, they fully recognized that they weren't going to be perfect, that they were human, and government run by humans is still going to be, have the human failings. So they were by no way saying that this was going to be a perfect endeavor. But
that is right. That is right.
There isn't one better in the history of the world. So.
Yeah, and so to imply that we went from, being under a tyrant, under a monarch, to perfection is naive and ludicrous. It's just so. In order to understand history, you have to understand context. In order to apply apologetics intelligently, you have to understand background. Meaning, if someone tells you our country is evil, you're like, timeout. This is me doing the timeout sign like in football. Timeout. Some people do the X. Okay, you have to understand that the U.S. is special because we broke out of that, and this is what it looks like.
Yeah. So that's the first part of the Constitution. The second, as Matt mentioned, is the bylaws, so to speak. And this is the 7 articles that are laid out in this document that establishes how the government is structured and how the government can be changed, the rules, as Matt alluded to, that we play by. How many players on the field, et cetera. So again, this is laid out in 7 different articles. And just as a note, you will hear us sometimes refer to the Constitution, and we'll use a specific format. So, one of the things that you'll hear me say a lot is, let's say Article 1, Section 8. Well, when I say that, I'm referring to a specific article in the Constitution, and within that article, a specific section. So the first article, the 8th section, which in this case happens to be the enumerated powers of Congress, and sometimes even more specifically, clauses. In Article 1, Section 8, I think there are maybe 17 clauses. I'm going by memory here. So if you're referring to a specific clause, then it's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15.
Yeah,
and that's how we do it.
Just like if you're recalling a Bible verse, some people say the address in the Bible. Oh, that's Proverbs 13:23. Oh, that's Article 1, Section 2. It has to do with Congress. So whenever you refer to it, and you've read it and you have it in front of you, some people keep I know Jason always has a pocket reference to his Constitution.
Oh, this one?
There it is, right there. I'm telling you guys. I tell you what, I'm on a great team, man. I'm telling you what. And for those of you who didn't see it, he actually showed his pocket. What is it? Our founding documents. It's got to be the DIA, the DOA, Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, it's got the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, Articles of Confederation. Yeah.
Bam. The beta version, right? Or is that 1.0? So, and I'll tell you what. One of the reasons why we're just going over this is because we want to empower you with how to look at the Constitution. I mean, literally, by having a Constitution handy next to you, Jason has his. I don't have mine. It's in my library, and which I do have a library. So let's see here. So you can say, Article 1, that has to do with the legislative branch. They make the laws. Article 2, that's the executive branch. You can have it right there, and you can look at it and say that's Article 2, Section 1, and then bam, you are a constitutional authority. Kind of like
and I was going to say, and more importantly, when somebody's is saying something is absolutely false when it comes to the governing of our nation, that doesn't apply or is completely out of context, you can ask them. You can say, can you tell me where, which article and which section you're referring to? Let's look at that together. And it kind of forces them to, rather than just pick something out of thin air or something they've heard on social media or the media. It forces them to get specific and talk, and hopefully you will be encouraging them to learn a little bit about what is true and what is not true about how our government is supposed to be run.
In fact, to that point, y'all are audience members because this is important to you. If you don't already do this, the next time you get into a conversation about the Constitution, be ready. So if I want to talk about the legislative branch, okay, that's Article 1, the executive branch, Article 2, judicial branch, Article 3. Mentally refer. I mean, it's pretty easy to get some of these little documents that for free or just purchase one, have it ready, print it out, and say, oh, that's judicial branch, that's Article 3, that's Section 1. Okay, bam, and you quote it. And I'm telling you, you will be empowered, and people will look at you as a constitutional authority when you quote it and you understand it. Because when you read it, it will give you clarity. And when you read old text, like if you're reading the King James versions of the Bible, you got to really read it 5-10 minutes, and then it clicks, and then it seems like modern English. Okay, so that's how you can become a constitutional authority.
Right. Okay, so let's dig in. Let's talk about what is in each of those articles. Again, as Matt said briefly, we're going to, in future episodes, we'll dig in and talk specifically about what it contains and what it does not contain. So the first article after the preamble in the Constitution deals with the legislative branch. So this gives us all of what we call enumerated powers, those powers which are specifically granted to Congress. It also talks about the prohibitions on Congress, what Congress cannot do, and also what the states cannot do in terms of legislatively. So some of the examples that that we'll pull out to kind of get you familiar with what's in here. The very first line of that article talks about all legislative powers are granted to Congress. That means that there's zero reserved for anybody else, like the judicial branch. They don't make laws. It's only Congress. It also gives Congress the power to declare war. They're the only ones that can declare a war.
That's right.
It gives them the power of the purse, as you've heard, which if you understand the context of it, the power of the purse basically means that Congress is the only one that can write bills, that can commit our funds to be spent. And on the flip side of that, they're the only ones that can author bills to raise revenue in the form of taxes. So that is also all contained in Article 1, as well as some other things. But those are some examples of what's found in Article 1 and where they get that authority.
And one way to remember that Article 1 is about the legislative branch is to remember this is how I do it. Okay, what is the Constitution about? It's about laws. And what is the branch that's singularly responsible for making, quote, all laws or all legislative powers, unquote, is the legislative branch. Right. And the second article would be the branch that executes it, which is the executive branch, Article 2. And it talks about the president's powers, how the president is elected. So early on in an episode, Jason quoted, oh, yeah, it says in Article 2, Section 1, and it's like, bam, bring out the 50 cal U.S. Constitution reference. By the way, for those of you who aren't in the military, 50 cal is a big gun. It's a big weapon. And so the president's powers and how the president is elected, the Electoral College. So actually that would be, and if you want to refer to the Electoral College, that's Article 2. And
if you want to know what it really says and not what the media says or what your social media pundits say, you go to Article 2.
There you go. And it includes that the commander-in-chief of the entire U.S. military will be the leader of the executive branch, which we call POTUS, President of the United States. And if you've ever been in a military operation and you're fortunate enough to work with the President of the United States, it just says POTUS, because in the military, we abbreviate everything.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if you ever had that opportunity, but we said POTUS. I was like, what's POTUS? President of the United States. So
Yeah,
Yep,
so
go
I was
ahead.
just going to say that the third article in the Constitution, it deals with the judicial branch, and so this
Mhm.
sets up exactly what jurisdiction falls within the federal judiciary. Interestingly enough, most people think that the number of justices at 9 is set
Mhm.
in the Constitution, but it is not. It does not say in the Constitution how many justices sit on the Supreme Court. That is actually decided by Congress, which is why these days you are hearing a lot of talk about how
Yes.
Congress wants to pack the bench, pack the court, if you will,
Mhm. Mhm.
because they have the authority to change the number of justices. I think under FDR, I believe he
He tried. He
um,
tried.
yeah, he tried to do it. It's been more than 9 in historically, and it's been less than 9 historically. But lately we've been kind of not stuck on 9, but we've had 9.
Yeah, it makes sense. Next is Article 4, the states, how states interact with each other and with the central government. Another way I remember this is, after the first three branches of government, the natural progression of what article we're going to cover next is the states. So first three, legislative, executive, judicial, and the next in the order progression, it is the states. So this talks about the full faith and credit, meaning, and Jason, you can add to this once I
Yeah.
make a note, please, is if I have a driver's license in Nebraska, can I use that driver's license in Florida?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So the full faith and credit clause essentially is saying it would not make sense to have a united country if, everywhere we went, we had to get different
Mhm.
documents. We had to treat everything differently. If I get married in one state, but then I go to another one, do I have to get remarried? No, the marriage license is still going to apply. So full faith and credit say, hey, as one state, we're going to give full faith and credit to all the documents and proceedings of another state because they're part of the
Mhm.
United States. So,
In fact,
and that's a good example.
That's one of the reasons why the beta version failed. There were different currencies, there were different laws,
Hmm.
so it was really like 13 different countries. So in a very practical day-to-day way, the Articles of Confederation were important at the time, but it was a natural progression in making us now a more perfect union via our U.S. Constitution.
Yeah. Yeah, so the Article 4 also has in it kind of declarations about how the states are allowed to be admitted to the union. So
Mhm.
obviously we started with 13, but today we have 50, unless you're Obama, and then it's 58.
If it's
But
yes.
yeah, so how did those states get added? Article 4 says exactly how states can be added. It also guarantees to us in Article 4, actually Article 4, Section 4, and this is one of the most important clauses, it guarantees every state a Republican form of government. That means that,
Mhm.
we democratically elect representatives who will create our laws, who will make our laws. And every state is guaranteed that they will be part of a constitutional republic. So that's a very important part of it, because otherwise, if we're not a republic, if they don't guarantee that, then what other forms of government can we change to using our amendments? Could it be socialist? Could it be communist? Could it be
Yes.
any sort of authoritative government? No, it's got to be republic.
So important. And when you realize what we've talked about on a previous episode, this podcast, that on one spectrum you've got a monarchy, which is tyranny. On the other spectrum, you've got a full
Democracy.
democratic process,
Mm-hmm.
which is chaos. This is in the middle. Sovereignty is vested in the people through representatives which they elect.
Right.
So it's right in the middle. It's a balance of people having power and authority, but they are vested there. They're elected there by the sovereign votes of the citizens.
Right.
Yeah. So okay. So the next article is how to make amendments.
This is the fifth
Now
article.
Fifth article. Now this one is more complex. Okay, we'll just say that it talks about how to propose amendments and how to ratify amendments. This is a really interesting talk, and it's worthy of possibly a couple episodes later in the future. But when you think of how do we have new amendments, there is the proposal process and the ratification process. And you want to add anything to that, Jason?
No, that's exactly right. This is one of the shortest articles, but it is a little bit complex the way it's worded. But we've done a good deal of study on it. We're going to cover that in pretty good detail in another episode. So just suffice it to say, this is where you're going to find out how exactly you can get a new amendment to the Constitution. So the sixth article is essentially deals with debts. American debts, the supremacy of the Constitution, and oaths that the public officials take, right? So the debts part, this is thrown in there from a historical perspective. So remember when we were fighting the British, and we were either without a government or had our Articles of Confederation. In order to fight that war, we had to borrow money to pay, soldiers for equipment, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
We had to borrow money from lenders, from other countries, and et cetera. And we were in debt once the war was over, and we had to pay those back. And so those lenders weren't just going to forgive those loans. So when we changed from a Articles of Confederation to the Constitution, putting a section in the Constitution that dealt with how we were going to pay back debts was very important for those lenders, so they had confidence in our nation that we were upholding our obligations to them. And so we basically said in there, look, the debts that we had before this Constitution, we are going to also take on after we have this Constitution, so that we can pay those back.
So think about that. France, who gave probably the equivalent of billions of dollars to our cause in addition to their own troops. After we establish our nation, we have a government, and we say, hey, by the way, we're going to pay you back. It's like these guys are legitimate. Yeah. So by asserting and living up to our word, it gives the United States a higher esteem in the eyes of other nations of the world.
That's exactly right. The other thing that's in this article is it's what you'll hear of the supremacy clause. This is another really important clause in the Constitution. Again, we'll get into it a little bit more, but essentially states that the Constitution and any laws that are made in pursuance of the Constitution, meaning that support it and do not conflict with it, are the supreme law of the land. And so it lays out very clearly what is and what is not a law. So this is also the section that we'll talk about. You'll hear us talk about unconstitutional enactments, which is essentially a bill that passes, Congress, is maybe signed by the president, but is in conflict with the Constitution. Well, in here, in Article 6, in the Supremacy Clause, that's what tells us that we don't have to abide by those. Those are not constitutional law enactments. So that's an extremely important part of it. And then the last part.
Can I add something there?
Go ahead.
So in the supreme law of the land, the Supremacy Clause, what it does, it cancels all other previous laws. So if some state, or including the Articles of Confederation beta version of the Constitution, it says it's done, it's over with. This is the new. And every once in a while, you might read an article that says, what about these other laws before the Constitution? What about they're canceled out via, Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution, which talks about the supremacy of the U.S. Constitution as the supreme law of the land.
Yeah, that's a great point. And thanks for throwing that in there. And then the final part of Article 6 deals with oaths. And again, extremely important. I mean, there's no part of the Constitution that's not important, but again, this is obviously near to dear to Matt's heart and mine, as well as all of you who out there who are veterans or service members, law enforcement, right? So every public official in the United States, by the Constitution, must take an oath to support and defend it, including the president.
The Constitution, not a person, the Constitution.
Right. Yeah, including the president, although his is actually a little bit different, and it's specifically called out in Article 1. But this is what makes every public official. It doesn't matter, at what level of government, whether they're, president or dog catcher. If they're an elected official, they take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. And that means, again, in accordance with the Supremacy Clause that we just talked about, that if there is a law out there that is, or an enactment or an edict that is not constitutional, they have taken an oath that they will oppose that because it doesn't conform with the Constitution. So,
in fact, after the Civil War, Lincoln made sure that every single congressman from the South swore an oath again to support and defend the U.S. Constitution. And by the way, some congressmen didn't, so they didn't get to hold office.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so and then final article is Article 7, which is the ratification of the Constitution. So it just basically lists the signatories, representing the original 13 states. There was actually, 55 delegates who attended the Constitutional Convention, and then in 1789 on Constitution Day when they signed it, as we said, 39 of them signed it, and
could you imagine that? No, I won't be there. I was there for the Declaration of Independence. I was there for the beta version, so it's like it's okay. Could you imagine?
Imagine being there, great grandson and reading.
Grandpa, why weren't you there?
Right, reading the diary and saying, "What are you doing?" So
and the last.
Yep.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
So and that last part are the amendments. Of course, the first 10 amendments are the Bill of Rights, which talk about individual rights and states' rights. And once again, the Bill of Rights were not initially part of the U.S. Constitution. It wasn't until a couple years after the U.S. Constitution was not just ratified but enacted, which is so. And the other amendments, they're 17 right now. Jason, I don't know if there are any on the horizon.
27 total. There's the Bill of Rights is the first 10, and then there's 17 more. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Jason, you want to comment on some of those other 17?
So some examples, I'm sure everyone's probably familiar with these, but obviously there's, we've got amendments in there that abolish slavery. We've got amendments in there that protect citizens from state tyranny, right? In the very beginning, the Constitution, many of the ways that some of the laws are written, it says Congress shall not pass, or Congress shall not legislate. So it was only protecting people from acts that the federal government made in support of, against liberty. The 14th Amendment actually puts into place, and it basically transforms that and says, hey, it's called the incorporation doctrine. It incorporates those protections from the states as well. So now after the 14th Amendment, anything that's listed as a protection and an immunity in the federal Constitution is also applied to people, so they are not encroached by states in terms of state tyranny. So in the beginning, that wasn't such a big deal, right? In the beginning, the framers of the Constitution, they were worried about the federal government being too powerful. And that's still a concern today. But now today you have states like California and New York who are exerting tyranny over their citizens. And the 14th Amendment is critical because now it protects those citizens from overreaches from the state governments as well. So
and now during the Civil War, now think about that, or post-Civil War, it was put in place so that if you had a state that wanted to have slavery, this is yet another protection for individual rights against tyranny. So a lot of relevance throughout history.
Yep. We've also got amendments in there, prohibition of alcohol, and interestingly enough, the repeal of that amendment. So you have an amendment, and then 3 amendments later, it's repealed. So it also shows that our Constitution can be flexible enough to move with the will of the people as well. So, and then of course presidential term limits and several other different amendments that we won't necessarily go into detail until we get to that part of our in-depth study. So that's it, gang. That is kind of our introduction to the Constitution. It's kind of a Constitution 101, if you will, really to kind of orient you to the way that the Constitution is structured, its purposes, how we refer to it, the supremacy of it, how it applies to the states, how we, use it as part of our federal government, if you will, including the national government and the states. And this will kind of be maybe just a little primer on to kind of get your mind in the mode as we move forward into what is listed in each article and how it applies and how we can reference to it. So hopefully that's been helpful, and you guys can use this in your maybe not everyday life, but again, as people are coming up with nonsensical and idiotic statements about what is or is not legal or constitutional, you can break out your Constitution, and you can instead of searching the whole thing, if they're talking about something the president's doing, you can go just to Article 2, right? If they're talking about state stuff, you go to Article 4. So hopefully that'll give you a kind of head start and get you ready for the rest of our education on it.
All right. So hopefully you guys listen to this a couple of times so you can kind of get it down. And all right. So great work today, Jason. Folks, thank you very much for joining us today. Please go to patriotcoalitionlive.com. That's patriotcoalitionlive.com. Thank you for your monthly support. It's very important to us. Remember that we have an email address, freedom@patriotcoalitionlive.com. That's freedom@patriotcoalitionlive.com. Subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts, like iHeartRadio and Spotify, or wherever you normally get your podcast. Please give us a 5-star rating. It does matter. We appreciate that.
And your support is always appreciated. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys. Take care. Bye now.